In 165 BCE, the Greek king Menander inherited a vast Indo-Greek kingdom from his father, Demetrius I. Following the push of Greek influence into the Indian subcontinent, since Alexander of Macedon, the kingdom now stretched from Afghanistan all the way into India. Menander's rule was characterized by great military success and administrative skill, but despite his fame, influence, and immense power, Menander was driven by a deep philosophical curiosity and a thirst for ultimate truth. He had mastered all the arts and sciences of his time, but felt his knowledge was incomplete regarding the nature of the self, suffering, and reality. You see, Menander was styled as a philosopher king in the Greek tradition, who found himself unsatisfied by the answers that he was getting from the various Greek and Hindu sages of his court. So, in the year 150 BCE, he famously invited a Buddhist sage named Nagasena to his court. The conversation that followed, recorded in the ancient text Milindapanha, or The Questions of King Milinda, forms one of the earliest bridges between Eastern and Western thought. The Milindapanha sets the scene by describing him as seeking a scholar who could resolve his deepest philosophical and spiritual doubts. After the fascinating debates between them both, as recorded in that text, Menander formally took refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, or the three jewels, and this act signified his commitment to a Buddhist course of action, or converting to Buddhism. The text concludes by stating that Menander placed his son on the throne, gave up his worldly life, and entered the monastic order, eventually achieving a spiritual attainment known as arhatship, which is complete liberation from suffering. This profound achievement is recognized as a vital step on the path to full Buddhahood in some traditions. What this story does is it encapsulates the intellectual and spiritual leap required for someone rooted in a Western worldview to grasp the nature of the Buddhist path. I'm saying this because nowadays becoming a Buddhist is a growing trend in Western societies, and the proliferation of mindfulness and mindfulness-based techniques in addressing mental health problems suggests that there is a deep value worth exploring, since these techniques are extracted from Buddhist and Stoic philosophy. However, Westerners often struggle to understand that while a growing number of secular views posit that it is not strictly a religion, but a system of mind training, it is important to note that for the vast majority of Buddhists globally, it is fully embraced as a religion, complete with deep reverence, ritual, and rich cosmology, all of which are considered essential supports for the practice. The respected Buddhist teacher Ajahn Jayasaro suggests that Western religions are primarily belief system religions. At their core, they are characterized by adherence to specific, unverifiable theological claims, for example, the belief that Jesus rose from the dead, or that God is intrinsically good and created the world. In contrast, religions originating from the East are often better termed educational system religions, in that their primary function is a practice of a course of action one undertakes to become enlightened, not believe in something. So it's basically about being a Buddhist before it's about believing in the Buddha or Buddhism. This distinction is pretty critical and often counterintuitive for a Western mindset when thinking about religion. And the main intellectual block is the association of all religions with that Abrahamic model, whose articles of belief are constantly being challenged and undermined by the scientific method. Buddhism, conversely, can be viewed as a blend of philosophical, poetic guidance, and practical training. It offers a methodology for identifying the causes of anguish, that's suffering in oneself and the world, exploring directly and individually the antidotes to that suffering, and offers, thirdly, a system of practice and training principles that reliably bring about the conditions for success in that venture. So in a completely secular reading, it is an ancient form of philosophy that's very useful, and therefore converting to Buddhism does not inherently mean adhering to unsupported metaphysical beliefs as a primary prescription, with the Buddha famously denying to answer questions about metaphysics directly when asked on several occasions, even in Buddhist scripture. That being said, Buddhism is also a religion, and many schools emphasize that certain metaphysical beliefs are not just necessary, but required to actually walk a Buddhist path. And while a utilitarian reading of Buddhism as a philosophy is possible, it is not sufficient. I will be using a few key resources to explain what is meant by converting to Buddhism in this video. As practitioners themselves say, going for refuge to the three jewels. I'll be doing this primarily to inform my own culture, which is a Western audience. The first book is the short but highly insightful book, The Meaning of Conversion in Buddhism by Sangha, the founder of the Triratna Buddhist order. But I'll also be drawing on the work of Thanissaro Bhikkhu with his book Refuge, An Introduction to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, Kosho Uchiyama and his book Opening the Hand of Thought, which is Foundations of Zen Buddhist Practice, Master Sheng Yen's Why Take Refuge in the Three Jewels, Stephen Batchelor's Buddhism Without Belief, and Patrul Rinpoche's book The Words of My Perfect Teacher. I hope that this selection ensures coverage of traditional and modern monastic and lay and the major philosophical schools within Buddhism, though admittedly, given the time we have together, may not be completely comprehensive, and of course I'll link the sources in the description. The way we will unpack this topic will be to use Sangharakshita's heuristic of the 4 levels of conversion. So we'll be exploring what it means to convert to Buddhism in 4 levels. I will then draw out clarifications, points of differences, or additional topics from the other authors and works mentioned to hopefully do justice to the topic. I do encourage viewers to share their experiences in the comments below, read the sources I provide for themselves so that they and others might benefit. Okay, so to begin with, let's start from the top at level 1. We call this level Going for Refuge to the Three Jewels. The concept of conversion is common to all religions and ideologies. In a spiritual context, it means turning one's life orientation away from the worldly towards that which is seen as permanent or true reality. Christians might call this the sublime, Buddhists call it seeing reality itself, which we fail to recognize because we are distracted and made to suffer by the dazzling lights of conditioned worldly things. In both cases, there is an internal commitment to reorient one's attention towards a spiritual ideal or a transcendental ideal, aka one that transcends this world of material comings and goings. In this basic sense, converting to Buddhism fits the definition. Although the secular perspective holds that the true authority of the Dharma lies in one's own verifiable experience, not in the authority of the Buddha or scripture. Converting from one religion to Buddhism is a reorientation of one's highest values from the previous set to those expounded by the Buddha's teachings. The word Buddha is not just a proper name, it actually means one who is awake or enlightened. The historical figure, someone called Siddhartha Gautama, was the son of a noble family from the Shakya clan around the 4th to 6th century BCE in what is now northern India. He is the first person in living memory to achieve this state of enlightenment. He is not worshipped as a god, but venerated as a teacher, pointing the way so that other people may seek and achieve enlightenment too. Thanissaro Bhikkhu emphasizes, however, that refuge is taken in the fact of his awakening, trusting that his realized truths are verifiable by us. As Sangharakshita notes in his lecture on the ideal of human enlightenment, while a human is an animal, a human is also so much more than an animal, because we have rational faculties. Likewise, the Buddha, while also a human, is so much more than an ordinary human because he achieved enlightenment. So he's neither a man nor a god, he's somewhere in between, which again, Western concepts don't like. The true start of conversion is called going for refuge to the Three Jewels, or in the Three Jewels, with jewels symbolizing the most precious spiritual items. Those 3 jewels are the Buddha, which is the ideal of human enlightenment, a totally calm, unconditioned, imperturbable mind, glowing with positive energy and compassion for all beings. The Dharma is the truth of how things really are, or the teachings that reveal that truth. In some traditions, the Dharma is seen to be limited in understanding mainly to those teachers who are part of the lineages who have received teachings down to the generations and can relay them. Then there's the third one, which is the Sangha, the spiritual community aiming for enlightenment and practicing the Dharma altogether. The literal definition in the traditional schools like Theravada and Vajrayana is often restricted to the Sangha being for ordained monastics or those who have achieved insight into the deathless. Though in the West, Sanghas may encompass both the lay and monastics or do away with the distinction entirely, but have different layers or levels of one overarching Sangha. As most scholars agree, while many Buddhist communities and denominations have developed different emphases and symbolism, what unites them all is a commitment to the Three Jewels. It is the essence of being a Buddhist. It is worth noting, however, that in the Vajrayana school, the Guru or Lama, which is the spiritual teacher that is alive today, since the Buddha is not, is revered as the 4th jewel and is often seen as the most vital, acting as the living connection to the lineage of teachers and a foundation for the entire Buddhist path. Sticking to the core 3 jewels, however, which is common among all schools, according to traditional Buddhism, it is these 3 elements that offer complete liberation from the suffering and unsatisfactoriness that plague our waking moments. By focusing on the ideal of enlightenment, training according to the methods that lead to it, and being supported by a community, we create the context or the refuge needed to transcend ordinary conditioned existence. Sangha describes this as conversion from an ordinary, mundane way of life to a spiritual and transcendental way of life. So where does faith fit into all of this? Well, concepts like rebirth and even karma are treated primarily as metaphorical by secular Buddhists, and often Western practitioners start off emphasizing the poetic or metaphorical utility and beauty of these concepts, while not rejecting them outright, keeping an open mind given the ultimate futility of rejecting or accepting metaphysical propositions. This position is also deeply connected to the Buddha's original emphasis on immediate spiritual practice. He consistently declared that he only teaches anguish and the ending of anguish, or dukkha and its cessation. This pragmatic focus is famously underscored by the simile of the poisoned arrow, where the Buddha likened metaphysical speculation to a man shot with a poisoned arrow who refuses treatment until he knows the archer's name, caste, and bow type. Such inquiries, the Buddha thought, were undeclared and irrelevant to the urgent work of liberation, and the refusal to set them aside would cause the wounded man, or the practitioner in this case, to die before finding freedom. This contrasts sharply with traditional schools. Thanissaro Bhikkhu states that belief in literal karma is key to moral protection, and the Tibetan Vajrayana tradition holds that acceptance of the literal suffering of samsara is the necessary ground for cultivating deep renunciation. So those are the different views on offer. I'm not claiming which is right or wrong, and in general, Buddhists for the whole are fairly open about making sure liberation is achieved, and for some Westerners, that can be a more secular reading, or they may find that Buddhist metaphysics are deeply moving and necessary for connection with the material, and respecting previous lineages and traditions, which have worked for so many in the past, is also a very valid running hypothesis to make when exploring the doctrines. Ultimately, the core faith of any Buddhist, traditional or secular, is a faith that the ordinary human mind can be transcended with training. The monkey mind, if you like, caught in the programming of evolution or trapped in the rounds of birth and rebirth, must be overcome. When one recognizes profound positive changes through meditation and Dharma practice, or experiences a vivid sense of a different enlightened mind, even if momentarily, one begins to intuit for oneself that the Buddha's central achievement is at least theoretically possible. One then begins to experience with their own senses the changes he described, leading to a faith that one can dedicate oneself to the project completely. One may start as an admirer of the Buddha, but as one experiences some of the things that he was talking about, people may become converts when the Buddha's enlightenment is placed at the pinnacle of spiritual achievement. At this point, people are ready to become Buddhists and usually have a ceremony or ritual where they announce their refuge in the three jewels, often reciting the phrases in the ancient language of Pali: Buddham Saranam Gacchami, I go for refuge in the Buddha; Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, I go for refuge to the Dharma; and Sangham Saranam Gacchami, I go for refuge to the Sangha.
Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami.
Pali is considered the closest language to what the Buddha actually spoke. The early teachings, or the Pali Canon as they're often referred, were passed down orally and later written down, famously in the Dhammapada. Preserving this language is to foster an unbroken philosophical lineage between us today and the Buddha back then. Master Sheng Yen stresses that this formal type of ceremony is a required process, it's not an option, which must be conferred by a precept master of the Sangha. New adherents will also usually recite the 5 precepts, or 10 precepts for those seeking ordination. These precepts are training principles that reliably establish the conditions for awakening. They are to refrain from taking life. The secular perspective views these precepts not as fixed moral laws, but as practical guidelines rooted in empathy, requiring courage and intelligence to apply appropriately in a continually changing world. Other traditions like Chan recommend that it's best to become a vegetarian. To refrain from what is not given, this applies to objects as well as time and words. To refrain from sexual misconduct, this requires genuine consent and extreme sensitivity. It does not specify how many, when, who, what gender, what sexual orientation. To refrain from false speech, this includes gossip and not speaking when skillfulness requires it. The focus is on using speech to increase harmony. To refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind, this precept is explicitly precautionary, helping us to maintain a clear mind to protect us from breaking the previous 4 precepts. Buddhism does not offer a list of goods and evils. Rather, these are training principles that must be applied skillfully to one's conditions. For example, if a medical condition necessitates a particular diet, e.g. not vegetarian, or if one must lie in a life or death situation, exceptions should be explored sensitively. Buddhism emphasizes wise and unwise actions, those that lead to suffering and disharmony for oneself and others, and those that lead away from it. The new convert is invited to adopt these principles and observe their effects. As Sangha opens the 2nd chapter, he says, we may start off by going for refuge to the 3 jewels, but in the end, we must ourselves become the 3 jewels. It is not enough to simply convert by seeing the golden city off there in the distance. One must jump into the river itself. The term stream entry is the metaphor that marks nominal Buddhists from those who have truly made enough progress in applying Buddhist values and meditation practice to their life and conduct. Stream entry represents the moment at which your momentum towards enlightenment is so strong that no obstacle can hinder your progress. The internal struggle against old conditioned patterns has subsided, and the new adherent has now entered the current that flows towards nirvana. The Buddhist conception of a wheel versus a spiral is useful here too. The wheel of suffering, or samsara, is the sense that life is going around in circles, conditioned by the same reactive patterns. The world seems doomed to repeat cycles of unsatisfactoriness, regardless of material conditions, a concept that you can also find in also various Western theories, such as Oswald Spengler's The Decline of the West and The Cycles of History by Arnold J. Toynbee. Most people accept the adage that human nature doesn't seem to ever change. The cyclical life is characterized by what the Buddha called conditioned experience, the teetering from opposites, from pleasure to pain, hot to cold, yes to no, the sense that we always need something more to be happy. Our reactivity is the perpetual impulse to move from here to there, constantly searching for the opposite condition to the present one. The new convert begins to explore a new relationship to life and its stimulus, training themselves to let reactivity be, to let the stimulus play out without leaning in or leaning away from them. The time interval between the stimulus of the world and the reactionary response grows longer, allowing the person to engage the world in now ever more creative and less conditioned and compassionate ways. If this gradual path is adhered to, the mind's circular habits and dualistic thinking loosen. The advanced Buddhist begins to spiral upwards and out of this conditioned existence. The spiral indicates a kind of progressive, cumulative, self-reinforcing ladder out of the repeated cycles of samsara, moving, for instance, from happiness to joy, then going up from joy to bliss, from bliss to rapture, and so forth. Stream entry is the momentum needed to achieve escape velocity, a tipping point where the adherent is assured of escaping the gravitational pull, if you like, of conditioned existence. So this is why it is considered a deeper level, or level 2 of conversion. The core insights to reach this escape velocity, the central truths of Buddhism, known as noble wisdom. Those are dukkha, or anguish and unsatisfactoriness, impermanence, dependent origination, emptiness, and anatta, or no self. Over time, the adherent sees how dukkha is the source of suffering in their own life. They recognize the impermanent nature of everything, which reduces the incentive to cling to the contents of consciousness. Linked to this, they see that no object of consciousness is independent. Everything is the effect of a prior cause, illustrating the karmic law of cause and effect, or dependent origination. As such, all concepts and objects of consciousness, including one's sense of self, are recognized as empty of any intrinsic discrete value. Far from being nihilistic, this recognition frees the practitioner from clinging to hollow philosophical or religious doctrines. They develop a faith that nirvana is possible, and their escape from suffering becomes assured. Zen master Uchiyama asserts that this path involves settling the immovable true self on the true self, avoiding the dualistic thinking that creates delusion. Sam Harris uses the example of one meditator focusing on the breath. One can achieve high concentration, but still cling to the subtle sense that there is a self doing the noticing, a thinker behind the eyes. The stream entrant is someone who has seen beyond this. This sort of level 2 Buddhist, even though it's silly to talk about levels of Buddhists like as if they're, Super Saiyan or something, but the level 2 for the purposes of this Buddhist has opened the door fully and has achieved the liberation of emotional energies that leads to deep tranquility, true happiness, and finally, samadhi. This provides a vantage point where one can see reality itself, reaching that transcendental wisdom. Even a scientifically minded secular Buddhist will recognize progress in the path, that they can inhabit very different minds through concentrated meditation and insight, particularly on retreat. They would still recognize the ideal of a tipping point beyond which one has wrestled one's mind under control and rebuilt one's default settings outside of habitual reactivity. Buddhism also places strong emphasis on what's called the fetters, aspect of the religious life that can block or derail the advanced Buddhist spiral ascent. While I will cover all 10 in a future video, hopefully, the most salient one here I'm going to talk about is the fetter of being dependent on rites and rituals, which includes the precepts. While precepts are essential for the early convert, strict adherence to them can become a hindrance if they are followed like an unchanging religious law. The Buddha himself noted that an ultimate dependence on rituals could be a chief blocker for stream entry. The Buddha tells the story of a man who comes to a treacherous river, wide and dangerous, with the safe shore on the other side. He collects grass, twigs, and leaves to build a raft, and by strenuous effort paddles himself to safety. Having reached the peaceful shore, the man thinks, "This raft has helped me greatly. It has carried me across this dangerous water. I must carry it with me for the rest of my journey." But the Buddha asks, would that man be acting wisely? The disciples replied, "No, Lord. The Buddha teaches that his Dharma, his entire teaching, is like that raft. It is built for crossing over, not for grasping. Once you reach the freedom of the safe shore, the teachings, doctrines, and even the rituals must be set aside." This is why the ultimate dependence on rites and rituals can become a chief blocker for stream entry. The call to be a refuge unto oneself is understood traditionally as committing to the development of skillful qualities in our own minds in imitation of our enlightened models, rather than self-contained individualism. Thus, one could convert to Buddhism and deepen their practice while simultaneously emphasizing the historical Buddha less and less as a person. So far, the discussion has been primarily in terms of individual attainment, my enlightenment, or your enlightenment, or his enlightenment, or her enlightenment. To some Buddhist schools, this is a limiting and incomplete view. As Sangha observes, you can, if you so wish, pursue individualism to its limits. You can think grimly in terms of my enlightenment, disregarding everything else, and get quite a long way. Then, when you have attained your own individual enlightenment, and are, as it were, resting upon a celestial pinnacle, you can lift up your eyes to the even loftier peak of unsurpassed perfect enlightenment. The Mahayana movement, emerging in the 1st and 2nd century CE, was a re-emphasis on the outward-facing aspects of Buddhism. They believed that full conversion was signaled by the arising of the will to enlightenment, or Bodhicitta, the awakening mind. Master Sheng Yen states that aspiring to Bodhicitta for the liberation of all beings belongs to the superior category of conversion, while aspiring only to individual liberation is the middle category. This will be broken down into 3 kinds of courage in the Vajrayana tradition for liberating others. The king's way, which is liberating one's way first, the boatman's way, which is liberating all simultaneously, and the shepherd's way, which is liberating all others first. The shepherd's way is the highest aspiration as one vows to attain Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. The final culmination is perfect enlightenment, one that recognizes there is no discrete me to be enlightened. To be truly enlightened, one must abandon all concepts of me and mine and truly recognize and inhabit anatta, no self. Sangha describes this as the resolution of the tension between withdrawal and involvement. Therefore, because there is no discrete you, by extension, all beings, the whole universe, are felt to be part of oneself. Compassion for suffering naturally then flows to all corners of that universe, and communicating the Dharma as the antidote to suffering becomes an irresistible expression of that. The Zen tradition states that this compassion is realized when the practitioner takes all phenomena and all beings as nothing but our own life, transcending the duality of self and other. Mahayana schools focus on cultivating this sense of selfless enlightenment, emphasizing the practice of loving kindness. This is the focal tension point for practice, the twin trends of wisdom, which is withdrawing to realize the nature of reality, and compassion, which is involvement for the suffering of all beings. When these two seemingly at odds trends fuse, the duality is transcended. One becomes simultaneously involved in the world intensely for the good, while also being existentially withdrawn, committed to making the world better while having no personal existential stake in the results. According to the Mahayana tradition, this new transcendent space is marked by the expression of 4 great bodhisattva vows. However innumerable beings are, I vow to save them. However inexhaustible the passions are, I vow to extinguish them. However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to master them. However incomparable the Buddha truth is, I vow to attain it. Finally, the deepest sense in which we can think of converting to Buddhism is attaining Buddhahood ourselves. We have seen the path so far. To summarize, the first level was looking at recognizing the Buddha as the highest ideal and then taking refuge in the three jewels. The second level was the fruit of that practice, which ultimately leads to stream entry or spiraling out of conditioned existence as we apply ourselves. The third level is looking at transcending the individual self and realizing, even right from the beginning, that one's enlightenment is actually the same as the enlightenment or welfare of all beings, Bodhicitta. The final stage is perfect enlightenment, living from a place of perfection, totally free of subject-object dualism, or as secular Buddhists might say, free from evolutionary programming completely. The secular perspective emphasizes that this culmination is not a thing to be attained, but a continuous process of cultivation. In Buddhist scripture, this process involves the spiritual death of the self and rebirth outside of conditioned experience, termed turning about, in the deepest sense, seat of consciousness. This is the most radical conversion, according to Sangha. As we practice day by day, we are adding positive weights to one side of a scale, with all our conditioned experiences on the other side. For a long time, the scale remains tipped towards conditionality, but according to Buddhist traditions, with enough weight and diligence, the scales suddenly tip, and enlightenment is achieved. We can see this in the poetic analogy of the stonecutter, a story by Ramana Maharshi. Once upon a time, there was a man who wanted to split an enormous rock, he said. He delivered blow after blow after blow, until he had struck the rock 19 times. Still, nothing happened. The rock was immovable. And the man, mustering all of his final strength, gave one last tremendous blow to the rock. And with that 20th blow, the rock split neatly. Now, were those 19 blows in vain? Well, of course not. Without the consistent practice, aka the 19 blows, chipping away at the rock of our conditioned existence, the final blow, the moment of realization, would not have been possible. This is the metaphor for dualistic practice giving way to non-dualistic realization, the way of striving that leads to non-striving. As emphasized in the Zen tradition, the required effort is very subtle. It's like suddenly seeing the world through a glass window rather than just one's reflection in that glass window. In the ultimate sense, it requires almost no effort at all. It's like a subtle change in perspective. It's already there just under the surface. Realizing that there is no separate person looking back, and to keep to that analogy, there is only consciousness and its contents. The Zen tradition and the concept of supreme yet effortless effort can be confusing. The Buddha addressed this directly with the story of the monk Sona, who was practicing so hard that his feet bled, and he nearly gave up thinking he was failing. The Buddha asked Sona if he had ever played the lute before he became a monk, and Sona replied, "Yes, Lord." The Buddha asked, "If the strings are stretched too tight, is the sound sweet and playable?" And Sona replied, "No, Lord, the strings break." "And if the strings are too loose, the sound is dull and muffled?" The Buddha concluded, "In the same way, Sona, energy that is too forced leads to agitation, and energy that is too slack leads to laziness. The middle path is about finding the perfect balanced pitch, striving with effort but without strain." So this paradox of effort is very interesting to reflect upon on this stage. It could in fact be said that it is the supreme achievement of Siddhartha Gautama to have got that balanced and discovered that middle way, to have struggled mightily and finally transcended the human situation, becoming the Buddha. In fact, even in traditional Buddhist schools, where the existence of gods and supernatural deities are encouraged to be literally accepted, one finds that all of them, including the supremest of the gods, bowing to the Buddha, not the other way around. The highest path on the spiritual ladder is the enlightened human being. Fundamentally, this changes the stakes for the human condition and what it means to strive for spiritual attainment. Freedom from suffering for oneself and for all present and future beings becomes a practical, educational, philosophical, therapeutic, political, and ethical commitment that goes beyond the normal Western understanding and apprehension around the word religion. The Buddha emphasized seeing for yourself, not believing blindly in anything, saying in the famous Kalama Sutta, "Do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing. Do not go upon tradition. Do not go upon rumor. Do not go upon what is in a scripture. Do not go upon surmise. Do not go upon an axiom. Do not go upon specious reasoning. Do not go upon a bias towards a notion that has been pondered over. Do not go upon another's seeming ability, nor consider the monk is our teacher. But when you yourselves know, when you know for yourselves, these things are wholesome, these things are blameless, these things are praised by the wise, these things, if undertaken and observed, lead to benefit and happiness, then you should enter and abide in them." As we conclude this overview of conversion to Buddhism, it is essential to re-emphasize the scope of this discussion. The journey from a Western perspective to going for refuge is multifaceted, spanning philosophy, psychology, and traditional religious commitment. My aim has been to synthesize these diverse perspectives and will necessarily be incomplete if you are adhering to a particular tradition. Ultimately, the validity of any path within Buddhism is measured by its efficacy in alleviating suffering, a pragmatic emphasis that has allowed this tradition to successfully translate itself across every culture it has encountered, including the Western one. Whether suffering is understood as arising and sustained from cosmic and supernatural sources over many lifetimes, or is understood as suffering directly experienced as a human alive today, one would need to judge the effectiveness by the yardstick one is using, and that is very much a personal journey that Buddhists undertake. What King Menander and Nagasena understood by liberation from suffering all those millennia ago, and what we understand today may be different, or they may be different viewpoints or different flavors of the same ultimate truth about the mechanics of suffering of conscious creatures. The Buddha would invite you to see for yourself.